There's nothing worse than working on a song and ending up with a crowded mix. And with a little bit of creativity, you can make a horrible mix that sounds like this. Become a lot better and something that sounds like this. Now, to achieve this, we're gonna go through 4 steps that you can apply to your mixing in your own songs so you can make better mixes and in the end, better songs. Let's go down to Ableton and let's get started with this tutorial, shall we? So we're here in Ableton and we're gonna start our mix, and the first thing that we're gonna do today is start with EQ. And we have 3 goals when starting with EQ. First, we're gonna clean up the mix, especially in the low end. Second, we're gonna boost a little bit of the mid, so we give a little bit more focus in the mid range of the elements that should be given focus over there. And third, we're gonna clean unnecessary parts of the song. For example, shakers, we have a little bit of low end in there as well. So let's get started with this. So listen to this, for example, how it sounds right now. And let's get started with this piano over here. There's a lot of low end coming from this piano, so we're just gonna clean a little bit of this. Let's listen to this. We also have a little bit of low end over here coming from this. We don't need that much. We already have a bass coming over here. And we also have now a little bit in the toms if you listen to this over here. There's a bit too much low end in there, so we're just gonna clean a little bit of the toms over here, especially the sub region. You can see that we already cleaned a little bit of this mix over there. Now the second thing that we're gonna do, we're gonna boost a little bit of the mids of the sound. So in the piano again. Possibly over here as well in the bass. Now also over here to give a little bit more focus here. Can you see how we're giving each region to each of the elements, and essentially we're giving this a little bit more to the piano, this a little bit more to this mid bass over here. Now let's go to the percussive side of this, because in the percussion there's also a lot of low end that we barely listen to, but it's there. For example, listen to the shaker. And you can barely say that there is low end over there, but when we put it over here with an EQ, you're gonna see that there's some low end coming over here, and we don't need it. You can just cut it completely off. You can see that it doesn't change the sound of the shaker, but it also cleans a little bit of the mix. And we can do this to almost all the elements over here in the percussive side as well. For example, there's a lot of low end coming here. Same thing with the claps. Now this hat, we barely listen, but can we clean a little bit? Yeah, we can. Same thing with this one. A bit of low end here. We don't need that. So essentially everything that you don't need, you can just clean. And you can see how this already gives a little bit of clarity in the mix. So now let's go to the second step of our mix, which is essentially mixing and adjusting the levels of all the elements. For this, we're always going to use a reference track, because a reference track is essentially a map for what we have to do. And we're going to start with this reference track. If you listen to our track over here and the loudness, and now the reference, you can see that the reference is a bit louder. So we're going to make this reference a bit of the same loudness, something like this. Now it feels that both are at the same loudness. Essentially, the reference track still has a lot more power because it has more low end. And that's already a reason why I want to use a reference track, because using a reference, I can understand if my track is a bit too loud or too quiet. And essentially, for example, if we listen here, and listen now to our track, I have already 4 comments that I want to make about this track. For example, the kick is too quiet, the bass is too quiet, the piano is too loud, and the hi-hats and the cymbals are too quiet as well. Listen to again to the original and the reference with that in mind. Now, knowing this, we know exactly what we have to adjust in our tracks. For example, we have to adjust the kick. And for this, we always use a spectrum analyzer. If you're using Voxengo Span, you can check the settings over here. But now using the spectrum, you can see that the kick, it's playing over here at around -15. And our kick is playing at -23. So essentially, we're going to make it a bit louder. Almost at the same loudness, but listen to how I was before. And now. And now compare it with the reference. It sounds a lot more balanced, at least for the kick alone. And why start with the kick? Because the kick is normally the most important part of your song. And that's normally what I start with. Now, the second thing that I do is adjust the bass and the sub. Over here, we have the sub split it from the bass. And if you listen to this, it's at -20. Now, if you listen to the reference track, you can see that the kick is playing over here at -15. The sub is also playing at -15. So essentially, the kick is playing at the same loudness as the sub. You can check more about how to clean up your low end in this video in the top right corner. But in this example, the kick equals the sub level. Normally, I like to leave it from 0 to 3 dB, but now let's do the same thing and adjust the sub in our song. It already sounds a bit more balanced in the low end. And we're gonna go now into the rest of the bass. Check this region, for example, and check the reference track. Can you see how this is a lot louder in the reference than in our track? Now we're gonna do the same thing and adjust this until the point that this is a bit louder. The bass is coming through a lot more because listen to how it is now and how it was. Now, it just comes through a lot more in your mix. And we're gonna do the same thing with the piano. So in the piano, we're gonna come here, and because it was too loud in our reference track, still a bit too loud, we're gonna lower it a little bit more. But now it becomes a bit too quiet, and I just liked it before. Again, the reference track is just a guide, and not necessarily you have to do everything. And you go do the same thing for the percussions over here. So if you listen, there's a lot more high end coming through. So we're gonna essentially just boost all these high ends and the shakers as well, and maybe 2 dB. And maybe we're gonna take a little bit of these toms over here. We have a lot more to do over here in the video, but you can just keep on doing essentially this listening and referencing. And if you want to check our video on EQ matching, which is another thing that helps you do balancing of levels, you can check it over here in the top right corner. And this already sounds a lot more balanced. And now this allows us to move to our third part of the video, which is essentially sidechaining of the songs. Now, in this third part of the video, we're just gonna adjust the sidechaining. And essentially why we're using the sidechaining, because we already have the sidechaining for the bass, which is the main thing. But we're gonna add sidechaining to other elements to essentially add groove to the song. We're using Shaper Box over here, using Volume Shaper, nothing against compressors, but I just prefer using it this way. I'm just gonna copy this sidechain, and if you listen to how the kick sounds like comparing to this, you can see that we have the sidechain exactly shaped to our kick. Now we're gonna copy this, and we're gonna start adding to some other elements to add a little bit more of groove to it. For example, this piano, we can add a little bit of groove with this. We don't need to be that intense because this is not a bass element. And we can add, for example, to this tension string as well. This thing that I like doing for my sidechain essentially is the further right I am in my spectrum, the less sidechain I technically need. But at the same time, I'm gonna need a little bit. So normally I'd keep the higher things at around 40 to 60 or sometimes 70%, especially pads, which are more sustained. And things are more plucky and more rhythmic, I like keeping it around 60 to 80%. So do we apply sidechain to the percussions as well? Sometimes yes. For example, this over here, we can add a little bit of sidechain to it. Just a tiny bit. Same thing for our shaker. What if we add a little bit of it? And maybe we want to add it also to this tom over here. Maybe also to the claps. Essentially what we want to clean is to clean the transient of the kick, so the kick goes a lot more through in the mix, while also giving a lot of groove more to the song. And if you listen again to the song, everything is pumping with the same rhythm because we're using the same shape in the shaper box. We're just adjusting the intensity in which the sidechain goes through. And now let's go to our last step, which is essentially the stereo mixing of your song. Now, talking about stereo width, essentially the goal over here is to make the sounds wider and not only making the song fuller, but also making sure that nothing is getting on the way of anything else. For example, listen to this hat over here. It's playing a little bit more in the center, but if we listen to this continuous hat over here, they're getting one on top of the other. And this is the problem because essentially we are just doubling the sound. What if we pick this hat over here, this 16th hat, and added a Haas effect? You can see that now the hat is wider and the main hat is going all the way through in the middle. We can do the same thing, for example, with claps. We have two claps over here. Both are playing in the center. But what if we pick one of them and added something to make it wider? Now you can see that the claps feel a little bit wider. You can do the same thing to melodic elements as well. Listen, for example, to this lead over here. This is the lead from the track Dunes, but if you listen to the white noise of that lead, it's playing on top of the lead. What if we pick the noise and put it a little bit wider? For this, I'm using a Haas effect, not only for this, but for the other elements as well, which you can check over here in the top right corner how to make your elements stereo as well. But you can also use, for example, if you're talking about basses, I wouldn't recommend you using a Haas effect. For that, I would recommend you using a plugin called Wider. Listen to this over here. How can we make this wider? With this plugin, essentially, we can just boost it a little bit. And without it, now we made the brass tab a little bit wider, and essentially we can do this to a lot of the elements in the mix. My go-to whenever I'm doing this in my mixes is this a main element in my song? So kick, hats, clap, snare, lead, bass, they normally stay in the center. But the other elements, can I put it in stereo? Listen to the reference track and listen to how they're doing over there. Where is the hi-hat in the reference track? If it's in the stereo, why can't you do it the same way? And that's it. I hope you liked the video, and I'm sure that if you adjust these 4 steps carefully with the help of a reference track, your mixes are going to get a lot better. Leave it here in the comment sections which of these 4 steps do you feel that you need to improve the most in your mixing as well. Now, I hope you liked the video, and if you liked it, I hope to see you soon in the next Abstrakt video next week. Ciao!